Good evening, folks. My name is Lemos. I'm the curator for public programs and research at Nottingham Contemporary, and it is my pleasure welcoming you to this online contemporary conversation with Tavia Nyong'o, with Jayna Brown, and Blanco Borelli to explore Black radical utopian practice, the performative dimensions of blackness, and the poetics of sound. So for those of you tuning in for the first time, Nottingham Contemporary is a contemporary arts centre in the UK, and we often invite academics with expertise in different subjects to collaborate with us on expanding our curatorial research in public programs and the artistic propositions in our exhibitions. So this evening expands on Sonic Continuum, our multi-platform research program that investigates practices of world-making through sound, both as a force that constitutes the world, but also as a medium for producing knowledge about it. So we believe that the past few months have granted us an insightful outlook on the pleasures and urgencies of dialogue, of criticality, of togetherness, and we feel that we couldn't be more proud to be gathering tonight with these speakers at a moment of reinvigorated political energy, also at a moment where the interlocking systems of oppression that include police violence, that include the prison industrial complex, and forms of economic and environmental vulnerability have made visible or require and invite more complex models to understanding subjectivity, identity, and community. So taking cue from their proposals, from their scholarship, this evening it looks at the role of speculation and fabulation in contemporary Black artistic production, but also it explores the intersections between sound, dance, gender dissidence, and Black embodiment to address social imaginaries that exceed conditions of traumatic loss, of social death, and archival erasure. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jayna Brown, who is a professor in the graduate program in Media Studies at Pratt Institute in New York. Jayna is the author of 2 books, Babylon Girls, Black Women Performance and the Making of the Modern from 2008, and Black Utopia, Speculative Life and Music of Other Worlds, due for release in February 21, both out with Duke University Press. As well as numerous articles and essays, Jane is editor of the journal Social Text and co-director of the Pratt's Global South Center and contributing journalist to NPR's music programming. Thank you, Jayna, for joining us. And Tavia Nyong'o is a chair and professor of theater and performance studies at Yale University. He is the author of The Amalgamation Waltz, Race, Performance, and Bruises of Memory from 2009, and Afro-Fabulations, The Queer Drum of Black Life from 2018, which is out with New York University Press. He's also the author of numerous Black and queer art, music, literature, and performance reflections, and a long-serving member of the Social Text Collective. He also co-edits the Sexual Cultures book series from New York University Press. And finally, I couldn't think of anyone more thrilling and energetic to chair the ebbs and flows of this dialogue, so I'm pleased to introduce the wonderful Blanco Borelli, who is a dance and performance studies scholar. She is a reader in dance theory and performance at Royal Holloway, University of London, as well as assistant professor in dance theater and performance at the University of Maryland. Her research interests include identity, corporeality, blackness in Latin America, decolonial aesthetics, and thinking beyond the human. Melissa is the author of She is Cuba, A Genealogy of the Mulatto Body from 2015. So without further ado, thanks so much for everyone for joining and tuning in today. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent University for graciously supporting our events program, and also to my colleagues Ryan Kearney and James Bauer, who are supporting us this evening. Thank you again, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I couldn't think of 2 better people to have a conversation with, Tavia and Jayna. We've actually known each other for quite a bit. I met Jayna when I was a graduate student at UC Riverside, and she came and gave a talk on Babylon Girls. I think it was just about to come out, or it had just come out. And we actually bonded about Cuba and our trips to Cuba. And Tavia, I met again as a graduate student as part of Black Performance Theory Collective, which is a group of scholars Black performance scholars that work on Black performance theory, started by Thomas F. DeFrance, the wonderful Thomas F. DeFrance over at Duke University. And the three of us have been at several of the meetings. So we've always had, at least every couple of years, an opportunity to get together and talk about Blackness, performance, and everything related to those wonderful, capacious topics. So thank you so much again, Sofia, for inviting me. And I'm just going to do a brief introduction to our conversation, and then I'll hand it over to Jayna to begin. So this keynote moderated conversation considers the ways in which Blackness, animation, geological devastation, Black science fiction, polytemporality, corporeality, and digital detritus coalesce in the works by three Black artists we have chosen today. Wangechi Mutu, Nairobi, New York; Wura Natasha Ogunji, Nigeria, Texas; and Jacoby Satterwhite, New York City. In each of our respective provocations, we address what we find capacious. That is, the ways in which these artists gesture towards how Black world making is a project that must figure beyond our time, space, and the logics of racial capital and social death. Black imagination, as materialized through these cultural productions, opens crevices and considers the potential of destruction, akin to the Yoruba Orisha's Oya's power over death and rebirth, to bring about an end and new beginnings. Given the theme of this event under the rubric of sonic continuum, we are asking you to think beyond your eyes, to consider the ends of ocular centrism where Blackness equals death. Instead, let's think about what this end might feel like, touch like, sound like, through the cacophony of Black voices and bodies walking, carrying, eating, jumping, dancing, or traveling between worlds of their own making. Over to you, Jayna Brown.
That was really beautiful, Melissa. Thank you. It was lovely. So I'm going to start today with some prepared remarks that spring out of my new book, Black Utopias. And my central argument in this book is that to answer ethically to this era of apocalypse that we're all in, we must let go of being human. That is, everything that we think being human means. That is, that we are an exceptional species, the most evolved of all carbon-based life forms, and as such, we have the right to dominate over all the planet, or in a paternalist model, have the responsibility to husband it. And I'm thinking of animal husbandry there, the term animal husbandry. The domestication and breeding of animals is called that. But we have to also remember that the human is a category of exclusion. So for many, apocalypse is a continuing condition. The world has been made dystopian through slavery, colonialism, and all their violent afterlives. So we need to imagine not only new genres of the human, which Sylvia Winters encourages us to think about, but new genres of existence, altered modes of being, which are actually already present in the practices and imaginings of those who have been excluded from the rights and privileges of the human. This can look like many things, but ultimately we remember that we are made of the same elements as the rest of the universe and rejoin them. This is a form of dissolution, but also of becoming. In this sense, ends are not ends at all. Apocalypse has the potential to open up a breach, to usher in new paradigms beyond what we can perceive from where we are. In my continuing work, I want to push beyond familiar onto-epistemological frameworks, those that are designed in man's image and with his interests as their central organizing principle. What are the possibilities if we estrange ourselves from ourselves to imagine multi and trans-species processes of desire and becoming? I have been inspired by the life forms Darwin put at the bottom of his list in terms of sentience and intelligence, which reproduce in wild and wonderful ways. So there are several scholars now working on this very inspiring. So we're thinking of mollusks, snails, worms, bottom feeders of various kinds that reproduce in different ways. They're not hetero reproducers. Also by those that do not fit into familiar taxonomies, such as coral reefs, which are both plant and animal, spores and fungus, which are their own genus, neither plant nor animal. But I realized recently that in my dreams of a radical biology, I have been holding on to the idea of an organicism untouched by technological manipulation, or the toxins, poisons, waste, and detritus produced through human dominance. Instead, I have to acknowledge that the organic has been irrevocably changed. And I realized this in a discussion that I was having at the University of Toronto. And it was a conference about biotech stuff. It was really interesting. And we were talking about artificial intelligences, and particularly the figure Sofia, an AI in human form. And one of the scientists was explaining to me what the skin was made of. And I don't know all the technical terms, but it was, as he described it, biological matter that had been programmed. And this just completely threw me off. It disturbed me, partly because I wanted to keep them discreet and have this magic biological world separate, but also because I think that the principles of dominance, mastery, and manipulation are still governing this biotechnological application. The very fact that we need to make AIs in human form in the first place. So I ask, what forms after the apocalypse and the irreversible effects of our supposed dominance? What lives in the oil spill, in the exhaust fumes? What does that life look like? And does it trouble the distinction actually between life and non-life? So today I'm looking at two pieces by Wangechi Mutu, selections from two pieces by Wangechi Mutu, whose work is full of wondrous interspecial beings: snakes, fungus, fish, birds, dismembered and recombined. Her work has an organicism transmogrified by an ecologically destroyed environment. Mutu's artworks are dark, stripped of the hope for sustainability, environmental justice, or ecological preservation. That's a generalization. She's a very prolific artist, but there's a strain in her work that I read like resonates for me in this way. Mutu's work in collage, video, sculpture, and installation center on women's bodies, but not as metaphors for Mother Earth. Instead, women's bodies as fractured, dislocated, fantastical. Their dismembered, reassembled forms evoke histories of colonial violence and violation. Her works link bodies and commerce, showing this nexus as the basis for capitalist exploitation of beings and the planet. In her works, bodies are not recovered or restored, but re-enlivened, sometimes on the other side of death. Often violently affected bodies give birth to distinctly unhuman forms. Her work refers to the technological wonders of the 21st century, which are sourced and produced in the global South. Her landscapes are filled with the refuse the shit consumer capitalism produces. Her shapes evoke, for example, in The End of Eating Everything, which we're going to watch a piece from, it evokes the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which exists between California and Hawaii. This is the biggest of what they call islands, the biggest of 5 islands of plastic amassing in the oceans. The last I looked, it was 1.6 kilometers, 600,000 miles big, and 100,000 tons of plastic. The terrain of her work gives a glistening, oily surface and depth to the devastation of the ecological world. So first, we're going to look at the a small 2-minute segment from one of her videos called The End of Carrying All. I believe we're going to see that now. Or, okay, well, let me say some things about it first and then we can show it after. This piece, which we're watching the end of, opens on a woman walking slowly, carrying a container on her head, beating off what looks like locusts, with birds flying behind her. As the video progresses, her basket container fills with the stuff of modernization, buildings, smokestacks, cast-off bicycle wheels. It opens actually with the woman carrying this container, and as it progresses, her basket fills with the stuff of modernization, building smokestacks, cast-off bicycle wheels, as we see. So as I read it, here we have the results of human exploitation over the earth, pictured as the burden of Black women, those who've been used in its production, development, and continuation. She transmogrifies into a slimy, single-cell organism, but one created out of the excretions of this world, the effluvium of its toxic waste mixed with biological matter to make a new form, alive, but energized by a disturbing phosphorescence and an oil-slick sheen that glows in the dark. This is soon internalized under the skin of the earth, moving and spreading and upending the soil with its glowing poison. So this video actually begins, for those of you who haven't seen it, I showed the end, with the head of the musician Santi Gold heading this monstrous being, and she is eating the birds. She's munching down the birds. So, and the birds are swaying in the air in this kind of uneasy viscosity. In the body of this being, arms are waving like cilia or anemone tentacles in the ocean. We have tires and other refuse seen in processes of ingestion, decay, and decomposition. This voracious and bloated entity, slick with toxic chemical waste, seems able to digest everything, expelling great plumes of gases. As Santi Gold, or the figure played by Santi Gold, chews the birds, blood dilutes into the viscous sky. The entity undergoes a series of transformation and is subsumed by its own expulsions. Now we showed the ending, which, right, it goes dark and then clears up into this beautiful blue sky with white fluffy clouds. And maybe we can talk about this. I'm not quite sure what to do with the ending, when, as if caught in a time ellipsis, we are suddenly in a clear sky full of puffy white clouds, like I just said. Emerging from these clouds are amoebic beings, perhaps a new species, containing the chattering head of Santi Gold. So I wonder, are we invited to disperse into, as Frantz Fanon calls it, the cosmic effluvia of the universe? Will we manifest as the same species or evolve into something new and unexpected? So the challenge, one of the challenges, one of the questions that I have coming out of this, another question is, are we looking at the preservation? What is our ethic if we're not predicated on the model of responsibility or the preservation or restoration of existing ecologies? So that's the end of my remarks. I believe then we have any thoughts that you have?
Just thinking about the end of eating everything, right? Because I also write about it a little bit in an upcoming essay, but really short.
Oh.
I also find that ending hopeful. I actually don't find it as, because there's almost this closing of the curtain of the event, but then you're left in this space of, okay, so what happens with those amoebas? What are they going to then coalesce and create something new? And she's eaten everything, but what if she gets hungry? And so I think that there's a continuum, right? I feel like time is of no matter there anymore, because we've only been given the glimpse of it. But yeah, so I don't know what you think, Tavia, but yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely seems to be something either cyclical or spiral about the logic of the film, in the sense that because we're not given a direct, um, because we're in the cosmic effluvia, we don't necessarily have a sense of scale, right? It does seem to be large, right? When the camera is pulled in, it seems really large, but then when it kind of pulls away, we're disorientated in relationship to in relationship to size, and that's, to me, conveys a kind of sense of the spiral, right? You know, it's kind of going around, but it's also, we're kind of either zooming out or zooming back in a way that is, I think, interesting. There's of the various organic metaphors that play in The End of Eating Everything, the one that I'm always kind of drawn to in some ways because of the title is the worm. And so I'm thinking about how the worm actually shits out, I'm probably simplifying this, but like compost or whatever, like the work that earthworms do actually in detoxifying or in producing new soil.
Yeah.
And that's also not necessarily, I think, we're maybe beyond optimism and pessimism as frameworks, but thinking about what this sort of like composting, right, or like mudsill sociality does in you know, throughout Mutu's work, and indeed some of her more recent pieces where she is making these really interesting sculptures that appear to be made out of either mud or soil, but also, to me, very powerfully reflect the termite mounds created in the savannah in East Africa. So there's almost a sense in which, I mean, they're kind of humanoid, right? But they're built out of this termite society. So that's interesting to me as well. There are some kind of interesting links to Satterwhite when we get to the single cell organisms, but I'll wait until later.
Cool.
Yeah,
I mean, I like that. It's just one thing. I know we have to move on, but that, you know, I like that advocation of the worm, because it gets us away from that idea that we're in this sort of like Mother Earth cycle of rebirth. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like that's not right. It's too cliche. It's not what's going on. So the worm in the evocation lets us think about different forms of when things happen afterwards. What comes out afterwards, or, you know, simultaneously, or whatever. But we can talk more about time, I'm sure.
So
Thank you.
Just wondering, yes, I'm just wondering how, if we can't see our own videos, well, how are we gonna, well, we'll just continue and we'll figure it out. Okay, so here's my little provocation based on Wora Natasha Ogunji's work. One second. So I came across Wora Natasha Ogunji when I was living in Berlin on a research fellowship, and she had some installations, and I started looking up her work, and I came across these short videos that she actually made, I guess, in the beginning of her artistic career. And thankfully her website's still up and the videos are still there. So I've had a chance to look at them, and I want to study them more. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to think alongside Jayna and Tavia. So sometimes thinking about the end of the world can be exciting. This is my segue from Jayna into mine. Besides offering some jouissance to those of us who enjoy a little bit of gallows humor, it offers an opportunity to imagine an elsewhere, somewhere after the end. The idea of the end promises a totalizing moment, one that stubbornly stops and forbids the forcefulness of time to barrel on. It signals an end of time, or within the neoliberal capitalist context, the lack of enough time for productivity, imagination, resource increasing or safeguarding, and even a questioning of our current political economic system that makes many of us long for its end. The possibility to imagine what happens after, if there even is an after the end, appears in different ways in the context of the works that we're looking at. These pieces, in their capacious imagining of ends, allow dance to become a prism for politics. As Mark Franco writes, politics are not located directly in dance, but in the way dance manages to occupy cultural space. Furthermore, dance is, quote, ideological, and it carries inevitable political effects for this reason. Art theorist Natalie Lovelace wonders when she asks, how might we inhabit human, non-human, never been human, and more than human social webs differently at all scales of existence? If an end or the end is inevitable, what creative and imaginative modes can we enlist to turn these endings into something else? How do you continue to exist after an end? What world or worlds rise up that offer new ways of being? How does an end signal an inevitable beginning? Continuation in the same way after an end is no longer viable. So how then to endure? I consider the video work of Wura Natasha Ogunji as a dance between worlds, a dance about comings, goings, and stuttered endings and possible beginnings. She often turns to the glitch, the interruption, and the breath as an aesthetic device to, in my analysis, jolt us into considering the violences of Eurocentric time and how Black world making continues despite. She makes a break from it and startles it, yet continues to exist within it. Black diasporic longings that leave imprints like the wake of the ship, exile and impermanence. Here I am reminded also of Ana Mendieta's longings for Cuba, leaving her marks on soil, on trees, in rocks. This is what I think about when I watch this conjuring of Ogunji. If Black Death haunts Black bodies, what can her body do but mark the ground, forcefully separating sediment with her makeshift shovel in order to assert presence? Can you please show belongings next? In similar fashion to Wangechi Mutu's The End of Carrying All, this video shows Wura Natasha Ogunji's belabored body dragging detritus in the form of empty plastic water bottles across the ground. Her drag it might also resemble William Popel's drags, right? Is a type of durational choreography that asks us to consider the labor of the Black woman's body and what it carries with it. Is there a respite for her, right? And what's interesting, I think, and this is in Wangechi Mutu, is that the respite is getting back into the earth, but here she disappears out of the frame. So is there a respite for her? Especially if we're thinking about violence of racialized capitalist time and its never-endingness. But let's consider this as a dance with the earth, the land, territory. What might that partnership look like or engender? And even if these markings and these drags are ephemeral, I'm drawn here to think about what, Jayna, you've written about the hypo and hyperplasticity of Blackness. I think you say there's a failure to change or mutate and the ability to mutate too much. So I'm drawn to those ideas in thinking through this work, but again, thinking through Wangechi Mutu's work in general. Can we move to video 3, please? My father and I dance in outer space. Losing a parent signals an end of a world where one is tethered to it through a genealogical connection to another person, two people, who made a decision to bring you into their world, the world, and help you see the world and perhaps make it better. Quote, I touch the ground, why should I? He's no longer there. He's up here with me, laughing, crying, trying to keep up. Can you do this? Can I hug you? Can you do this? No? Well, how about this? Yeah, that's it. Remember, don't touch the ground. Stay up, stay above. We were meant to fly. Slow down, let me catch my breath. I didn't want to go just yet. I want to dance a little longer. We were meant to fly. In this imagined monologue between Ogunji and the spirit of her father, I consider the ways in which this exchange and dialogue might expand the time she can spend dancing with him. How great to be able to dance with our ancestors away from the literal weight of gravity and the material world of racialized capital. We might even become weightless, since after all, time and space, as Albert Einstein wrote, are illusions of consciousness, albeit very real ones. Black performance is a capacious site. It, quote, involves subjectivity occasioned by action born of breath, as Thomas de France and Anita Gonzalez write in Black performance theory. It is informed by Black sensibilities, or stylized ways of being in relation to each other and our environments, where knowingly or unknowingly these sensibilities become sources of strength, resistance, or pleasure. Several times, Ogunji makes the same journey. The rhythm of it is jarring, but eventually we expect the slowing down. What doesn't stop surprising, at least for me, are the grunts and the breaths. Her body is jumping, working hard, and working hard to stay above ground. Editing and technological play contributes to this choreographic trick that she's actually fighting against gravity. Her knees come closer to her chest. She spreads her arms upwards, outwards. Sometimes one is up always while the other is down. The repetition of the journey is always the same with the laboring breaths and grunts. The sound of wind and glitches, the faded light, penumbra of day or night, all contribute to an otherworldly space where ancestors and futurity dance together. So those are the provocations I offer as a segue also between Jayna's work and Tavia's work into Black futurity. So I don't know if you guys have anything to comment upon that, or given the slight delay, we can just continue. I don't know. It's up to you guys.
We can have maybe a couple minutes back and forth if Jayna, you want to. I think it would be good. I have some thoughts.
You go ahead. Go ahead, Tav.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, Melissa, it's actually a great segue, you know, and work in its own right. I love this idea of dance as a prism for politics, or as a kind of a micro politics. I was thinking, maybe because of the glitches that we were experiencing and maybe our audience was experiencing or not, right? But about the interface, right? We can never really know kind of who's seeing what in this digital environment. It really kind of drove home the circulation of Black dance or Blackness more broadly in either the GIF or the GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, right? You know, there are like those kind of small animated, you say GIF. You know, those little bits of behavior, right, which are often but not always funny, you know, but very often but usually repetitive, and always kind of bespeak that stylization and sort of sensibility of Blackness that you kind of ended your comment by calling our attention to, is something that you know, I think is important. And then the other, you know, just because we're looking at dance through the screen or multiple screens, I always go back to this phrase that I'm just obsessed with from Fred Moten, where he talks about the para-ontological distinction between Blackness and Black people, right? Like, which I kind of take to mean the ways in which Blackness can kind of like circulate around para, you know, like the ontology of Black lives, right? You know, and this has something to do with like the spirit and the breath, right? But also with the commodity form, right? And technology, right? And this is, I think, you know, to draw back in, Jayna, your interest in both technology and its detritus and the imminent or actual collapse of consumer society and some sort of some sort of futurity that comes in the wake of that, and in the wake of that collapse. I think these are all suggested, despite the very barren and spare backgrounds that Ogunji chooses for, I take it, for most of the videos, or at least the videos that you showed us.
Yeah, and I like that connection between the barren space and the labor, the physicality of her body always kind of interrupting the barrenness. And again, like, it made me think back to Wangechi Mutu and the woman walking with all that on her back.
Yeah.
I was,
There's a very early Mutu performance of washing. I don't know if either of you have seen it, where she is, I think it's actually herself in the video, just like sort of laboriously washing a floor, and anyways, that just, there are these shared concerns, I guess, both about women's labor and about the kind of repetitive action in a certain tradition of,
and the durational
art,
nature of all of this,
and then and also like the ritualistic, because there's something ritualistic about repetitive. Well, depends. Yeah, obviously it depends on the type of labor, but I think there's a ritualistic, hypnotic kind of quality of doing the same thing over and then.
And the way it can influence, the way it can shape the body, that kind of repetition, and maybe in some ways, Ogunji's body is being shaped by the digital, right?
Yes.
Glitching, and being, but yet resisting. I don't know quite what to do with labor in that, because she's not laboring. She's jumping. She is free of labor in some way. Maybe.
Yes, because she's
not touching
making
the ground.
She's recording us. Yeah, she's recording the moment of weightlessness, right? Yeah.
Weightlessness and not being connected, not being attached to the earth. Stuff to think about. Those are wonderful videos.
Yeah, I wish she made more. I think she's focusing now more on installation and performance within museum spaces. But let's turn it over to Tavia to bring us to
performance in museum spaces.
Performance in museum spaces,
although actually Jacoby Satterwhite also performs, or in the past performed, in public as well. So thank you, and I'll just jump into what I had to say. I'll speak before setting up the video. In my recent book, Afro-Fabulations, The Queer Drama of Black Life, I developed the idea of angular sociality to describe a way of being apart in togetherness that is specific to the dynamics of Black queer movement vocabularies. This idea is not original to me, but to Zora Neale Hurston, who declared in 1934 that, quote, after adornment, the next most striking manifestation of the Negro is angularity. Everything that he touches becomes angular. In all African sculptures and doctrines of any sort, we find the same thing. Anyone watching Negro dancers will be struck by the same phenomenon. Every posture is another angle, unquote. Whatever the truth of this claim about Black dance in general, it is certainly true of voguing, the Black, brown, trans, queer, competitive dance, social dance style that emerged in the house ball scene in New York City in the 1980s. In Vogue, every posture is certainly another angle. Angular sociality names forms of appearance that are sharp, striking, and fabulous, as nightlife theorist Madison Moore would have it. Modes of self-fashioning that leave the stultifying world behind, as Jose Munoz would urge us to. Munoz also directs us to a then and there that speaks to alchemies of melancholy and loss, which I want to get into. In framing angular sociality against the backdrop of Black senses of time and temporality, I suggest in Afro-Fabulations that we bring our dead into co-presence with us in our live performances, into the spaces between us and the spaces we move through, environments filled with those we mourn and yet still fight for. In its luxuriant exuberance, such angular sociality can sometimes be taken for brand-addled consumerism. I would argue that it would be wrong, however, to conflate all commodity play and femme-centric self-fashioning with an acquiescence to racial capitalism. While there is no guarantee that the characteristics of Black expression equip us to refuse racial capitalism, there is, on the other hand, little hope of refusing racial capitalism without taking these characteristics into account. Hurston's emphasis on Black mimicry, although itself a dated term, can be helpful if it serves to remind us how performative angularity is always a repetition, but with a difference. In the discussion of the artist and dancer Jacoby Satterwhite that follows, I want to further develop this claim regarding the potential for danced Black angularity and digitally adorned play to make visible and therefore contestable some of the psychic costs of capitalism on Black subjects in the 21st century. Jacoby Satterwhite is a multimedia artist whose work often, he often says, multimedia artist diva, whose work often features psychedelic CGI landscapes into which he inserts his own dancing, playing body. He vogues, poses, and shoots laser beams out of his hands like a video game character or a big screen superhero. Satterwhite also builds sculptures and 3D printed objects and creates bodysuits, sometimes with helmets and screens attached, in which he can move through both art and public space. While Vogue is at the center of his movement vocabulary, his dancing is also freestyle and expressive. He is not replicating the exact technique of a competitive Vogue dancer, nor is he dancing in a ballroom competition. Rather, he is most often dancing in a studio against a green screen, multiplying himself through CGI so he can be inserted into spaces of seemingly infinite play. As he describes it, Vogue is already a dance form that works with imaginary objects like makeup compacts, mirrors, and cameras, meaning that the gestures are oriented around showing objects that don't exist. His video dances take up that technique as a cue to work with a cornucopia of strange and often quite sexy objects. The object world of his videos are not entirely random or unconscious, however, but derive from an archive of drawings that his mother created over a period of time when she was descending into mental illness. As Satterwhite describes it, these drawings were instigated by her avid watching of the Home Shopping Network. I don't know if everyone has that, like if this is something that's familiar to UK audiences, but it's a cable television channel in the US devoted to usually quirky devices promoted by celebrities. So the Home Shopping Network, with its perpetual parade of novel consumer gadgets, and reflect his mother's aspiration to develop an idea that would be equally marketable. In the video, you'll see some of these designs and some of her descriptions of what the designs will do. As her illness progressed, her drawings became increasingly ornate and abstract, and that complexity might be attributable to the respite they afforded her from the worst of her symptoms. Satterwhite's videos take these drawings, some annotated in his mother's own hand, as a basis for building his magical fantasy world of play and desire. His series Reifying Desire takes on the Marxist concept of reification, which literally means thingification, and mimics it in his creative process. While there is an established tradition going back to Warhol of artists embracing commercial culture as a means of upending aesthetic hierarchies, that doesn't seem to be Satterwhite's objective. Instead, he miniaturizes and multiplies his dancing body until it can serve as both sign and symptom of the effects commodity play has on the hyperstimulated subject. There is a tension between the severely analytical title, Reifying Desire, and the colorful, kinetic, and kinky videos that accompany it. What is the desire being reified? Can desire be reified? For Marx, reification occurred when a social process was mystified by capitalism. When I pick up an iPhone and my iPhone just chimed in to remind me that it exists and it's awaiting my suggestions, if not commands. When I pick up an iPhone at an Apple store because I desire a new smart device to replace last year's model, I focus only on the price and any discounts. I see a relation between myself, the phone, and the Apple store, but I do not see the supply chain of workers that mined the rare minerals, that assembled all the parts, that shipped and stocked the shrink-wrapped end product, or even the workers who then have to dispose the outdated iPhone that I threw away in order to make space for the new one. I also probably ends up in that garbage dump that Jayna Brown was talking about. I also tend not to see the laboring hours that I must work to pay for or pay off that price, nor do I reckon with the affective labor I am signing up for when I voluntarily link myself up to the latest round of 24/7 updated social media apps downloading at the latest Wi-Fi network speeds. All these modes and relations of production are mystified by the pristine white box I walk home with. Even the cash register has been eliminated in the Apple Store, lest the process of reification be sullied by anything so crass. This is what Marx means by capitalist reification of the commodity. It disguises social relations as relations between objects. In this sense, perhaps a better name for what we see in Satterwhite's video is a de-reification of desire. Not that we can unilaterally refuse capitalism, step outside of our fantasies, or ignore our vulnerable, debilitated bodies. But angular sociality forms a shady antagonism to an anti-Black and anti-queer world. In bringing the maternal relation front and center and substituting consumer commodities with objects drawn from a dream space that is within but not entirely of racial capitalism, Satterwhite's dance in the expanded field urges us to think the structure of the unconscious and the structure of racial capitalism together. And we'll watch about 6 minutes of Reifying Desire Part 5. It's a silent video. The text you're seeing is some of the annotations from his mother's illustrations or commodity designs. You will also see a picture of his mother at some point kind of zoom around the background of this space. And as well as, she just appeared for a second. You'll also see Picasso's, what is it? Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. One thing that his images readily evoke are video game spaces of video game play, and that is intentional. Satterwhite has talked about his own actually childhood battle with cancer that meant that he spent a lot of time in bed playing Final Fantasy, and that sense of being a first-person player within this hyperreal video game world is part of the aesthetic that he brings to his animations. He does all these animations himself, as well as appearing within them. As it sort of kind of continues in this world that he's somehow literally animating, right, with his laser beams, and you see these sort of like mannequin type figures then come to sort of life, and there is this literally hyperplastic, to use hyperplasticity that that Jayna was calling attention to, come to both the movement of these figures, but then also their kind of transmogrification. They become almost hermaphroditic at one point, and then one of these figures then grows a large phallus out of which ejaculates like a stream of little Jacoby Satterwhites that are dancing. So just to kind of, there's something clearly in some, at least of the objects from his mother's archive that he has selected, something a kind of an interest in the way, or a fascination with the promise of the consumer object to kind of like deodorize, sanitize, and sculpt the female body, right? And so one is called like, for pussy power, use this object and it will make, and but so reifying those capitalist desires that are actually really misogynist, right? There's sort of hatred of the of the female body, and then kind of reimagining it in this fabulated space in which, in fact, sexuality and jouissance and play is sort of hermaphroditic and polymorphous, and the individual dancer is indefinitely kind of extrapolated or multiplied through digital copy paste. So that's sort of some of the things that you would see if we were able to watch just a couple more minutes of the video. And then the last thing I'll say is that sort of as his work has progressed, and later he kind of began this work when his mother was alive. She's since passed, and some of his later work kind of is dealing with that, dealing with that loss. And but I would argue that there is this kind of relation even between a living person and what we the gaps and losses in communication that debilitation, illness, distance, right, can create. These are very much things that are on all of our minds right now in a global pandemic, right? And they, I guess for me, they add some layers of kind of an additional layer, I'll put it, to videos that seem initially kind of hypersaturated with color, play, sexuality, fabulosity, right? But that are also about this kind of, but are also about death and loss, and a kind of dealing with people who are kind of missing from the picture, right? And I think that is part of what's that's another thing that I think connects this work to Gunji and Mutu.
What strikes me, watching these is how uncomfortable they make me, because it's so digital. There's it's like airless. I feel suffocated with the airlessness of it. But at the same time, there's all this organic stuff happening, right? There's jizz all over the place, and I'm not quite sure what to do with that juxtaposition. It's disorienting because there's not a sort of a flat plane to work on all the time, and what am I to do with his dancing in this, bodiless plastic world, So like I was saying before about my discomfort around mixing the biological and the technological, this really does that for me. I don't feel comfortable watching this. So I don't know, it's not a question, just a comment, but maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah, I think that dimension of discomfort for me is also, I don't want to fall back on something as easy as a kind of generational difference, but I do think that a generation that is wholly immersed in video game play arrives at these digital spaces in a different way than, say, I do, right? In other words, that sense of projecting yourself into the digital environment again, this is all hypothetical because I do not know how to play video games, right? I don't play them. The last one I played was Miss Pac-Man at an arcade, right? So even that kind of, I associate video game play with very much with meat space, right? Kind of going to the arcade, there's a machine, doesn't work, you put a quarter in, right? It's quite different than this other, what do we used to call it? Cyberspace, right? In which, which I don't think is perceived as, which I think is perceived in a different way now than, than it is, at least for me, so that, yeah, it's, again, I'm thinking now whether there are certainly, as Satterwhite's work has developed, one other thing to say is that very often these videos are shown in art spaces that are actually, if anything, even more uncomfortable for me because they're modes of sociality that are like overly stimulating and too many, like I feel like I can't kind of like engage with what's happening with the work, right? So there's that. And then there's finally that he does actually, or he has in the past, like perform, he has these kind of like bodysuits which have like video screens attached to them, and he's almost in like Agent Piper fashion, like kind of taking those out into like Chinatown and other environments in New York City, and the sort of like danced and seen how the public responds to this particular, like the character that he is kind of embodying or performing in his videos. So as well as building sculptural environments that, you know, immersive environments for audiences, I guess back when we could have audiences in immersive environments. It'll be a while since, you know, it'll be a while before we do that again. But that was, I think, one of the directions the work was going. Yeah.
Well, thinking of it in those different environments really helps me. You know, I could imagine him in Chinatown. Then I can, and also in the sort of the sterile space, the white box of the museum, I can imagine feeling very differently about it than in my house with all my plants, you know, with my old self.
You're not that old, Jayna. I'm just mindful of time. Should we open it up for questions? I think, you know, we've been provocative sufficiently, I think, for some interesting questions to come. Okay, so this is a comment from That Looks Queer. The worlds we choose to create and interact with are increasingly moving into the digital space. It's natural that ways to mourn and to grieve should assume these forms. Actually, yeah, that's a nice. Here's a question from Marielis Wentworth Garcia. In dealing as a child with his own mortality, I wonder if the artist found refuge in the world of video games. It feels like an ability to exist outside of his own physicality. What do you? You're muted, Tavia.
Yeah. So sorry. So I think that was a question to me. Yeah. So exactly. That's exactly right. So part of what he says is that, you know, I mean, he's a really interesting character. He's a really interesting artist on his own work, right? This is not always the case, but like if you watch videos about, you know, it's almost like what do you have left to say, because he's so articulate, you know. But he sort of talks about, you know, cancer being, you know, being a disease that's supposed to kill you, right? So that like if you survive cancer, it's almost like you're it's like life after death, right? You know, like medical intervention in cancer results in like a kind of, you know, and so that gives him, you know, so he embraces that that sense that the organic form is already, his organic life is already intervened at this like cellular level in a way that is irretrievably like scientific and technological, right? So that's part of it, right? That's part of where the idea comes out of, right? But then part of it is also, you know, yeah, being in a hospital bed, like that bed you see kind of floating around, you know, first you think, oh, that's a childhood bed, or is it the hospital bed, right? You know, the thing you can kind of do in, you know, ostensibly in recovery, right, is, or in treatment, right, is like, is to kind of go to dive into these, gaming worlds, right? And so there's a kind of an analog, I think, between the gaming world, or he finds like a point of contact between the gaming world, his own gaming world, Final Fantasy and other games, and his mother's video games. I didn't get a chance to show this, but she also recorded, she's like an extraordinary person, right? Like hundreds of hours of a cappella songs that she wanted to record. And he has spent a couple of years working with a producer and DJ to actually make and release some, like an album of her music. So you know, yeah, like there are lots of ways in which, you know, he's not the only artist for whom like this, like, you know, Dance with My Father kind of relationship with another generation, particularly people who have been kind of shut out or excluded from, you know, from whatever, actually from life often, right? You know, from full participation in life because of debilitation or racism, poverty, sexism, right?
Hi, sorry. Let me record myself, right? Hold on. I have a question for both of you, because when we were talking and preparing, we started talking about science fiction and our interest in science fiction. So maybe both of you might want to share what science, you know, even though people may have already read your work, but it's always nice to hear from the scholar author. Yeah, why is science fiction an entry point to think through and about Blackness and its futurity? Yeah. Particularly in your work, or something that you've recently seen or experienced, you know, in pop culture, because I know you guys are cultural critics. If you might want to share something that helps you, that you can be like, yes, that's exactly what I'm theorizing. There it is, right? And, you know, I know that. And that way, maybe it'll generate more questions in our audience.
Well, I don't.
Well, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but you know, science fiction is a place, or at least particular authors can use this science fictional form to push and say, how far outside of your conceptual framework can we go, right? But it also brings to mind a book that Tavia and I both have read and written about, by Samuel Delaney, called Einstein Intersection. And in that, there's sort of, we have very different reads, and I probably don't have time to do that right now, but there's part of it is about the trying to fit into the human form, this extraterrestrial, this psychic entity trying to fit itself into the human form through use of biology, but also myth, right? Fabulation, which Tavia talks about a great deal. I don't know, maybe you want to say a few things or not, Tavia?
No, that's exactly right. I think that's, you know, where I was going to, Joe, we have a mind melt, right? Is that we both have an interest in Samuel Delaney's work in general, and in particular, we both have written, actually in our new books, right? We have sections on the Einstein intersection, which he originally wanted to call a fabulous formless darkness, which I think is an interesting, you know, alternative title. You know, this, I think, Jayna, your approach to it is very much in relationship to like the history of eugenics, and right, like thinking through some of those kind of consequences around that. Where I'm at the moment, any of my students are watching for some reason, they get a free preview of where we're headed in class, but like next week we're going to be reading Octavia Butler's short story, Blood, help me out,
Blood
Jayna.
Child.
What's it called? Blood Child, sorry.
Yeah.
And Zakiya Iman Jackson's reading of that, which is a similar, well, not similar, it's a different story, but it's about human alien reproduction, right? And she's sort of inviting us to sort of meditate in that story on the dilemma this human colonist on an alien planet has as to whether to go along with a kind of agreed upon implantation of alien embryos, right? Which is part of what allows this uneasy peace between these two species to kind of coexist. And it's like really kind of gory, you know, and involves like male pregnancy, right? You know, so it really upends a lot of our assumptions about reproductivity and replication, right? That I think is something that both, but in different ways, both Butler and Delaney as science fiction authors are able to kind of grapple with, right? So, part of my argument to come back to Delaney is that he's kind of grappling with like these ideas in the 1960s and 70s that are now technologies that are now available to us today, endocrinological, plastic surgery, right? But also kind of like mythic in that kind of broad Roland Barthes sense of myth, right? Like the kind of basically the discourses and symbolic systems that we live by, right? And around which we organize categories like race and sexuality and gender.
And incidentally, both of us were taught Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower last week. We were both teaching it in the same week, and we hadn't told each other, but it's a very timely book for those of you who haven't read it. It's eerily prescient of our kind of our apocalyptic days era, so if you feel like having your world reflected in a fiction that was written in the 1990s, which is actually about the results and consequences of neoliberalism, and hyper privatization, hyper capitalism, climate, and the effects on the environment is climate crisis, disease, the decimation of civil society. A very good read, and also the establishment of what could happen after the apocalypse.
Yeah, I think that on. Oh, go ahead. Well, I was just gonna. I think maybe were you gonna go to Laura Sullivan's question? Yeah. Okay. Because I think that
I think there might be one more in the chat
okay.
and then that's it.
That's it.
But let me go grab it. But yes, so let me just read Laura's question. I wonder if any panelists would be interested in speaking more about neoliberalism, Jayna, as you were just speaking, in relation to futurity. I'm thinking that they're used at least to be a pretense of modernist theological progress, but now there is just acknowledgement of disposability of folks. So neoliberalism, our favorite topic. The bane of our existence, literally.
I will say, just at the risk of repeating what Jayna just said, right, that I consider Octavia Butler to be one of our most prescient theorists of neoliberalism, right? Because it's like down to the nitty gritty, right? So she sort of, teaching a novel set in 2024 to the class of 2024 gives you chills, right? Like right off the bat, right? So my students are like highly attentive, right, to what this novel has to say about the world around them. And, they're not even like, it's not, I asked them, do you think she was prescient? And they're like, oh my God, it's like so obvious, right? But in another way, they're not living in the exact world that she predicted, right? So it's not as if she's some kind of like soothsayer, right? But like rather that it, being, thinking from the point of view of the victims and the disposable bodies of neoliberalism gives you a very different sense of what its future is than the official futures presented by neoliberal ideology, right? And this is also something that I would mention the work of Amy Bong, who talks extensively in her book about the contrast between capitalist speculation, right? The way in which neoliberalism seeks to harness the future through modes of through speculative pricing and insurance and debt and credit, right? And the kinds of futurity that are imagined in Black, brown, queer, indigenous, feminist science fictions, right? Which is not to say that those are always utopian happy places where we all live without outside capitalism, right? But that they're thinking through those capitalist dynamics, those neoliberal dynamics in ways that neoliberalism is itself kind of blind to, right? That neoliberalism kind of depends upon a total blindness to what its history, right? Like founded in the dispossession and genocide and slavery, but also its present and its future. I don't know. That's what I would say to that that question.
Jayna, do you want to add, or shall we move on to, I believe, our last question?
I don't know that I have anything to add. Tavia, you know, Tavia's eloquence always, you know, gives me food for thought.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to, it looks like, our last question. Do you feel that technology will always have a symbiotic relationship with humanity, or should we prepare ourselves for a point of separation and individual identity?
I don't know that I understand that individual, like, separation and individual identity, because
the way I'm understanding, well, technology, you know, technology requires human ingenuity. So, I mean, then there's those science fiction films, right, where the technology takes over, like Terminator. So I don't know, that looks queer. Could you elaborate a little bit more on your question, if possible?
It's almost like it's a question written from the future when we've passed the singularity and technology is like personified.
Oh, so there's a question for me. Curious to hear about notion of enduring or ending, how to harness ancestry towards futurity. Thank you. That's a great question. And then I might even open it up to both of you, or why not open it up to both of you? Yeah, I think I'm always interested in playing with this idea of teleological Western time, right? Like it's an invention, but we're in it, and you know, like Albert Einstein says, it's a figment of our you know, it's a figment, but its effects are real in the way we understand, the ways in which we understand consciousness, right, through time and space. So the way I'm seeing the work of Natasha Ogunji and a little bit of Jackal B. Satterwhite's work is that in order to imagine a futurity, you need to bring in the present, you have to consider the past in the present to then materialize a type of future. And that way, the ancestors, right, or those in the past haven't ended. It's a constant enduring. So that's how I was thinking about that. But thank you for that question, because it helps me think further about what it is I'm trying to say with this play with enduring and ending. So I don't know if either Jayna or Tavia.
I'd like to kind of always expand what we mean by the ancestors, because there's a way it can be wedded to a very kind of conservative humanism.
And kinship, and a particular kind of biological kinship.
You know, biological kinship, heterosexual reproduction.
Correct.
Linear timelines, trying to recover a timeline that's irrevocably lost. Anyway, but I'd love to think of it. I have a relative who speaks to spirits, or spoke to spirits. He's dead now. And he would talk to an ancestor, a former Indian, Native American chief, but also to another being that they reside among us, but we can't perceive them, named Golden Ray. So I'm wondering, like, how to use the best of that kind of idea of ancestry in terms of, you know, but without sort of getting caught in that kind of more, that other form, that sort of humanness in a bad way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm teaching Elizabeth Povinelli's book, Empire of Love. So, and we're asking exactly that type of question, like, how can you think about love outside of this concept of the heteronormative family, right? And what kinds of kinship models emerge, right? Because she works with Australian Aboriginal queer communities and San Francisco queer communities, and then theorizes this way of enduring, literally, because she's also interested in the concepts of endurance, and creating a community outside of, again, the biological concepts of family. Okay, unless there's any further questions, I think maybe if you guys have any final thoughts or comments that you would like to share, or we just thank one another. Nice to see you. Like a nice way of socializing, like COVID. I mean, you guys are just a train right away, but can't do it right now.
Absolutely.
It's just lovely. Yeah. It's just lovely to speak with you and to realize that there's such synergies in the ways that we're thinking, even when we haven't even told each other what we're working on recently. It's just, it's amazing. And I just really enjoy thinking with you. Both.
Yes, likewise. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Yes.
It's been great. I want to thank Sofia for providing this opportunity to us, and doing all the, visioning. I'm also, Jim and Ryan, who've been behind the scenes, but have been like making everything work in ways that I'm always so impressed by. But yeah, I know, and also thank everyone who's been watching and asking questions and engaging. So this has been a pleasure.